Hello, everyone. A provocation. So I've got 5 minutes to provoke thought. It's not a lot. It's not a long time, but I will do my best. I'm the Associate Vice President at the University of Southampton for EDI, Social Justice, but I'm very aware that that title means nothing. I rarely use that title. I don't think it's a helpful title. If I was to ask you all what EDI means, you probably have um, different ideas of what that means. I know that the term DEI is used in other places as well as other terms. And that's what I really want to talk about, language, and how language can be used as something that's liberating, but also something that is very limiting. I'm very aware that I'm speaking to you in the English language. I'm very aware that that's not my mother's, grandmother's, mother's tongue. And here we are encapsulated in a way that I am speaking around inclusivity, diversity, and what I really want to talk about is awareness. I really want to talk about how language can be used as a form of liberation. I'm going to draw from, if I can, in my 5 minutes, and please do stop me if I go over because I could probably take the whole hour. On Fanon, Baldwin, Lord, and a little bit of Angela Carter, Gloria, and Zudua as well, and look at the politics and how language is power. In this country, in the UK, we use terms like EDI, equality, diversity, black. You probably look at me and say, actually, yes, Pascal is a black person, but we have absorbed a language that doesn't give meaning. Language is obsessed um, with trying to give meaning and trying to compartmentalize, but lacks that emotion. So I really want to talk about how language can be used as a way for liberation, struggle, and as a political act, and how we can think about language as something quite immediate in these 5 minutes that I have, how language is used as a kind of a colonial weapon and how people like Fanon really talk about and analyze how he says, and I'll quote, to speak a language is take on a world, to take on a culture for the colonized subject. To speak a colonized language is to internalize the system. Audre Lorde goes on to say the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house, but quite often when we talk about liberation, when we talk about EDI, DI, we're still using the language of the oppressor. And what does that mean? And how can we ever get to a place in what we see in the current political climate where we are reaching a state of equality, diversity, inclusion, equity? What I really want to really talk about is how language as a kind of dynamic act robs, steals, and colonizes us right in front of our eyes. Even, and I'm aware, as I speak in this language, I am limited by language and it doesn't really decolonize us. So I want to talk about the liberated tongue and how that can be used as a weapon if used properly. Quite often that's a weapon used against us if we talk, and I don't want to talk too much about Trump and his politics, but if you use the term make America great, it also has an assumption that America was once great. And my question is great for who? Not great for the marginalized, minoritized, minimized people across the world. It wasn't great from the conception of the United States of America. And that's not just to say America is alone in that pursuit. Here in the UK, we use terms and political acts of make British jobs for British people. And we have to understand what a sense of being British actually is. Baldwin, in his essay, Black English Isn't a Language and Tell Me What Is Not What It Is, talks about language as survival. And I think that is really used in a powerful way by the right. They use a language which actually, in plain sight, will make us feel that we have to fight against something. My whole aim is to make sure that we evolve language and make sure that language is the first thing that we think about when we're looking for change. Can we register power by the language that we use? And institutions that I work in, and I work across lots of different organizations and institutions, we often use the language of the oppressor to try and create change. And my saying is actually, it's like trying to clean a dirty floor with a dirty mop. It will never get clean. We will never live into that experience where we actually have to find change for the people that it's actually impacting. So what does that mean in terms of how we can then find change? I think we have to use language in terms of our identity. When I talk about black, when I talk about, or when I hear terms like black, underrepresented groups, underprivileged groups, women, men, rich, poor, we're talking about binary. And this politicization and this polarization of language means that we always fall within the space of what I would argue nothingness. Bell Hooks talks about love. We rarely talk about love. We rarely talk about how we can actually reclaim language to look at the individual and that individual pursuit of how, if we are to then socialize and normalize change, we need to look at how we speak around these topics. EDI for me, DEI is, as it's been hijacked by the right, as we hear terms like woke and liberal and virtual signaling, etc., we are then having to fight in that space, which means that we will never actually deal with the topics and the people that really need it. I think DEI, EDI is more of a euphemism and it erases actually the past. And I think that's willful. I think that's purposeful. And the rhetoric is quite comforting quite often. And how many times, and I know that we've had this, and this is what's been attacked in America, where we have unconscious bias training. It's a rhetorical. What does that actually mean? And why is it actually unconscious? Why are we not questioning that? What I talk more of is unacknowledged bias. Unacknowledged because we don't even, or we haven't even started to tackle what that means. So we have to reclaim that language, liberate that language, and stop fearing that discomfort. I think the space needs to be raw. I think the conversations need to be uncomfortable. And in the terms of Baldwin, Fannin, Carter, we have to then try and not politicize our language, but look at the individual power, privilege, and position we have to speak of the individual experience. Quite often, DEI, EDI is hopeful. And I want to move from that space which is hopeful to that space which is transformational. Language quite often is transactional, operational. How we speak in our institutions. I work in a UK Russell Group 100 in the world, and we talk about how well we do things for marginalized. But the question is how well we do them for who? Quite often it's not women, it's not people of color, it's not people with disabilities. We definitely don't have the conversation around trans. So is that a branding exercise? And I really want to talk, and hopefully the space today, and I know it will be because you're all here, will be a conversation around linguistic, what I call linguistic rebellion. Um, and where Baldwin has rage, and Lord has clarity, I particularly gravitate towards Fannin's Fire. I question everything, and the power is in the question how people speak to me. Quite often, people will say, especially with people of color or women, we have to modify and codify our language, our tone, our behavior. Not just talking about verbal language, but also visual, how we dress, how we look, how our hair is. So the language precedes us. And if we don't actually understand, start to question, start to empower ourselves to the language that we inherit and how our language is being robbed, how I speak a different language to my mother's grandmother's grandmother, how that language is always oppressive. I do not think that we will ever find change, not in this lifetime and not the next. So I really want to talk about today and to really talk through this hour about liberated tongues and how we can build our liberation through the analysis of language, how language can act as not just a weapon, but the way that I see it is language is like a knife that can be used very usefully to carve out the space for marginalized and minoritized people. Quite often we see from the right, they use the language as a weapon and they will talk about swarms, they will talk about Mexicans, they will talk about blacks. We could just take the whole hour looking at the term black and how that racial construct doesn't give anything. You may feel that I am black, but I don't describe myself as black. I describe myself as a West African Black British person. That specificity is inclusivity. And that specificity is often lost in language and often not questioned. So, what my provocation is today is how often we ask ourselves, those transformational questions, not those operational questions or those operational statements, which will then absorb and maybe not question what we actually are and how we're actually fighting this fight for justice, social justice. My starting point, and quite often the arguments against are language is not action. Language absolutely is action. It's a political act because that's the first thing that people take away from us. It's no coincidence that in America they are reforming education. Education is the place where we start to look at language, we start to learn, and that is a concealment. Language can reveal and conceal, and it simultaneously does that with every single conversation we have. Quite often, I will speak to younger people, and their language, if it's not, it's deemed unprofessional, it's deemed inappropriate. It's not deemed inappropriate when it comes from certain groups which use it as a powerful political tool. So I really, really welcome your questions. And what I would leave hanging is how often we use and utilize transformational language in what we do. And I'll give you one little thing before I stop. I don't even know if I've gone over. I often ask people how we say hello to people. And you might think, what has that got to do with anything? How we greet people. Quite often I'm asked the question, are you okay? That question really positions, and this is a tool that I use with lots of my students and lots of groups that I speak to. Quite often, if you're asked, and we all do it, and I sometimes fall into it, the question, how are you? That's my question. It's what I call an invasive question. If we move from the operational procedural questions, are you okay, to the transformational questions, how are you? Actually involving people so they can have the power and the position to answer how they are, why they are, where they are. We've all got the I mean, some of you on the call would have been asked this question, where are you from? That question is an assumption that says you're not from here. And it's a political tool. And it's done in broad daylight. And sometimes because people are curious or they feel that they're curious, the intent is possibly not there, but the impact is there because it marginalizes you straight through the language. So I want to have this hour, listen, learn in terms of how we utilize language as a predecessor for change and not as something additional. I only had 5 minutes, so I know I've rushed through it and I've probably not gotten to half the things that I wanted to talk about. But language is a political act. Thank you.